In this video, I'll take you through the process I used to create this Steelbook mockup for my portfolio. We're going to model it, unwrap it, texture it, and set it up ready for rendering. So let's jump right into it.
TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut. In this tutorial, we'll recreate this box mockup that I've used for my portfolio. Just a warning ahead, this is basically a more intermediate tutorial. If you're not familiar with Blender, you probably won't be able to follow along. And there are some steps that I don't cover, like the final rendering and things like that, which should be bread and butter to people that are already familiar with Blender. If not, I suggest looking at some more basic Blender tutorials, like Blender Guru's Donut one. That's a classic, everyone loves it. All right, thank you very much. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so here we are in Blender. The first thing you're going to need to do is go to your scene properties and under the units drop down, choose centimeters instead of meters. Now that we've done that, let's select everything in our scene and delete it. Then we'll press Shift A to bring in a new mesh cube and we'll twirl down this properties panel here to set the size to 13.5 centimeters. That's the size of the Steelbook that I have, at least. Let's make this the shape of a Steelbook now. Let's tab into edit mode and I'll press Alt middle mouse and then flick until I get to my front orthographic view. Let's turn on X-ray and grab these top edges and move them up 3.5 centimeters by pressing G, Z, 3.5. That's going to make our box 17 centimeters tall. Let's go to the side view. We'll grab all four of these points here and we want to move them until the box is the right thickness. So that's 12 centimeters over on the Y-axis. So GY 12. You can see that's done it in the wrong direction. So if we then just press minus, it's going to change that direction and voila. Press enter and we have a box that is the right size. Let's turn off X-ray view, right click, go to set origin to geometry, and then we'll press Shift S to put that selection to our cursor and stick it in the world origin. That's looking pretty good, but let's start making it look like a game box. I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode, and on the right hand side of the box, I'm just going to press Ctrl R and then scroll up on the mouse wheel to create these two loop cuts. Let's left click to confirm those, right click to release them in the middle, and then we'll press S and Z to scale them up on the Z axes until they're about just over a third of the box. Something like that seems fine to me. So to create the grip on the edge of the box here, let's loop cut our box and we'll scroll until it's done that 3 times. This leaves us with these 4 nice, easily grabbed panels here. And to make our lives a little bit easier, I'm actually just going to select everything on the right-hand side of the box here by going to X-ray view. Let's flip into right orthographic, select everything on this side of the box, press X to delete it, and then remove those vertices. So we're only working with half a box. To see the full box, let's go to our modifiers panel, add a modifier, mirror, and we'll put that to the Y-axis. And now we're working with the full box again, but with only half the geometry, which is much nicer to work with. We now need to inset this face a little bit. So I'm going to loop cut one more time on the horizontal axes with 2 loop cuts, left click to confirm, right click to release. Let's scale those up on the Z axis with S and then Z until we get 2 loop cuts fairly close to these outer edges here. Let's loop cut one more time, right up on the edge of that loop cut here. Let's Alt Shift the second loop cut and press GG to slide those out a little bit. Let's press G and Y to move those on the Y axes a little bit, just a touch closer to the edge of our box, something like that. Let's press 3 to go to face selection mode and select this inner face here. Then we'll press G and X to move that in on the X axis. Let's do say 0.4 and negative. So that's then insetting inwards. And now we have this kind of grip on the edge of our box, which is looking pretty nice. Okay, with that grip now done, let's go and create the curves on the edges of our box. So let's tab into edit mode. Now this geometry is going to be a bit of a pain to work with. So let's press 1, select vertex mode, A to select everything, and go to mesh, clean up, limited dissolve. And that's going to basically delete all of these extra lines, which are going to make beveling these edges really difficult. So now we've got a nice, simple thing to do here. Let's press 2 for edge select mode and grab the corners of our box with shift clicking. Then we're going to bevel these by pressing Ctrl B and dragging them out a little bit. Let's left click to confirm it, and that'll open up this menu down here. You may need to twirl it up like so. Let's set the width of this bevel to be 0.5 and give it 8 segments. That's going to create these nice, smooth, rounded corners for us. Press Tab to confirm that, and then right-click Shade Auto Smooth, and you should get these nice smooth corners on your box. Okay, let's take a stab at creating the spine. Let's tab into edit mode, and I'm going to select just these top two edges, the top edge and the bottom edge here of our spine side of the box. Let's right click and subdivide those to create a vertical line only. Select that line and then press GG, so that's G twice to move it over to the edge of our box, like so. So let's go to face selection mode by pressing 3. Select that face and press P to move that to a new selection. And that's going to pop our spine in its own object and our box in its separate object up here. So that's looking pretty good. Let's add some beveling to make this box look a little bit more real. First of all, let's add a solidify modifier to our box. And you can see it's going to start the wrong way. That's fine, doesn't matter. Let's set the thickness to 0.04. That's going to add just some thickness to our box on the inside. If we slide the offset, you'll see that it will start adding the thickness to the outside of the box. That's not what we want. We want it to be thicker on the inside, and 0.4 is about right. So let's add a modifier to our box, which is a bevel modifier, and we'll set that to be 0.02 with about 3 segments. And you can see that's just going to bevel the outer edges of our box here. Now, my Steelbook has a heavy bevel around either edge, so we're going to select this outer face, Alt-click it, and press Ctrl-B to bevel that. And let's just left-click to go to our bevel settings. Let's set that bevel to be 0.05, and let's do 3 segments. That's just going to make sure that the outer bevel edge here is slightly larger than all of the bevels just on our smaller edges. One last thing to tidy up, you may or may not be seeing this depending on how you cut your spine. You can see we've kind of got this weird crease here. We just need to triangulate these edge faces by selecting them in face selection mode and pressing Ctrl-T. And that's going to help with the corners of our boxes. You may need to do that for both of these edges depending on how your mesh looks. If you don't see any of those weird creases, you're probably totally fine, but I need to do that just for the top and bottom edges of my box here. Okay, final thing then, let's tab into edit mode on our box, and we're going to go to edge selection and alt-click this central edge. Now you can see that's actually gone and selected everything I need all the way around my box, all the way along there. You may need to shift select to add in these final corners, but I didn't need to in this case because of my triangulation. Let's go to the mirror modifier and turn off clipping, and then we'll press G and Y to just slide these just a little bit out, like so. So there is a gap in our box. That's looking pretty good. Okie dokie, let's tab back into object mode, and I'm just going to quickly add those same modifiers onto our spine. So that'll be a solidify modifier set to 0.04 and a bevel modifier set to 0.02 with 3 segments. That's just going to give our spine a bit of thickness as well. And that is the outer of our box done, but we do need to separate our front and back portions of our box here. So we're going to apply our mirror modifier by selecting it and clicking Ctrl-A. That's going to make our mesh in our model here real. Let's Alt middle mouse until we get to side view. Just hide my spine so I can see everything. Turn on X-ray mode, and we're just going to select everything on one side of the box. So making sure that you've got nothing selected from the other side, but you have everything selected on one side. We can then press P, move that to a new selection, and we can now name our boxes box front and box back. In our spine, we need to select the spine, apply the mirror modifier, tab into edit mode, select everything with A, and we'll just remove this central vertex line edge here by going to Mesh, Clean Up, Limited Dissolve, and that gives us our fixed spine. Looking really nice. So this is the outside of our box done, but what about the inside? So first of all, we need to do a little bit of like false rigging with layer parenting to make this box work properly. So I'm going to select my spine, right click that and choose set origin to geometry. That's going to set the origin of rotation to our box to the center of the spine. Let's tab into edit mode, press 2 to go to edge selection and select just the right hand edge of our spine. And then let's press shift edge and choose cursor to selected. Tab back into object mode and select the front of our box. Right click, set origin to 3D cursor, and that's going to mean that when we now rotate this edge of the box is going to rotate on this spine, which is great. Let's do the same thing for the other side. Tab into edit mode on the spine, select this edge, Shift S, cursor to selected. In object mode, select the back of the box, right click, set origin to 3D cursor. Now we have a box that can open and close according to the spine at will. So let's open our box so it's completely flat and we can start working on the Steelbook interior. Grab the front of your box, press RZ90, negative to open your box all the way. And the same thing for the back, RZ90. Don't have to negative that one. And now our box is completely open. Let's grab the spine, Shift S, cursor to world origin. Let's select our back and front of our box. Then finally shift click the spine of the box and press Ctrl P to parent both of these objects to the spine. Now, when we press Shift S and move the selection to cursor, the spine will move to the center and the rest of the box will follow along. I'm going to Alt middle mouse until I get to front orthographic. And then I'm going to rotate my box so that the opening is facing the front here. So that's 90, negative. Now you can see my box is open. And when I look at front orthographic view, we're seeing the interior of the box, which is just a bit of housekeeping. At this point, it is good to make a backup of your objects. So I'm just going to select all of these objects here. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate them, right click to release, M to move to a new collection, which we'll call backups. Okay, and we'll just turn off backups so that we can't see them. So now that we have a safe backup, we can start working to create the interior of our box. So let's tab into edit mode on the front of our box, and you can tell that down to make sure that you're on the front here. Tab into edit mode, and we're just going to go to edge selection, and we're going to grab with alt click this entire interior edge here. Okay, we'll Shift D to duplicate just that edge, and then P to move to a new selection, which we will rename box front interior. For simplicity's sake as well, let's just temporarily turn off viewport visibility of our box edges and our spine. So now we know we're working with this single mesh object here. For simplicity's sake, let's just hide in the viewport our solidify so we don't get confused with our mesh. And let's do the same thing for the bevel too. So with all this selected, it's quite simple what we need to do. Let's just go to edit mode, press 1 to go to vertex selection. We're going to select these 2 point faces here and press F to create a face between them. Then let's press A to do everything else, F to do another face, and now we can inset this box. Now we have a face, let's bring back our other boxes here because it's less distracting. And in front orthographic view, I'm going to inset this face to be double the thickness of our box. So that's inset, that's I, 0.08. And that's going to create an inset face for us. Now we can Alt select with vertex mode selected, Alt click the outer ring, X to delete it, delete vertices, and we're left with a face that is slightly thinner than the thickness of our exterior box, which is perfect. Because when we then turn on our solidify modifier in the viewport, you can see that it comes up pretty close to the edge of the interior of the box, which is perfect for us. So I'm now going to do the same thing again. Let's inset that face. Let's do 0.04 this time. Then press E to extrude it backwards. And we'll do that to half the thickness of the box. So if the box is 1.5, let's do extrude 0.7 negative so that it's just in front of the Steelbook and not touching it. And we're not going to have any weird glitching. And now we have this kind of interior shell for this side of the box. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing to this side of the box over here. Now on my box, these interior edges here only come out halfway. So I'm just going to loop cut my box. I'll go to edge selection mode by pressing 2 and just delete this edge. That leaves us with this kind of half risen in section. And we'll do the same thing here for this side. So go to edge selection, loop cut, right click, select these 2 edges and delete them. While we're at it, let's add some geometry to this spine as well. So we will, for this one, we can just duplicate the entire spine. So let's duplicate the entire spine, right click to release. We'll call this spine interior. And I'm just going to turn off everything so it's not distracting me. Let's tab into edit mode for this one here. And we're going to add that loop cut from earlier back in. And we'll turn off the viewport visibility for our modifiers too. Let's go to face selection, select both these faces and inset them with I. And let's do 0.04. And you can see here that I'm going to make sure that individual is selected so that we create an edge on the inside where these edges are touching as well. Then I'm going to select everything, all the faces with A, and shift click to deselect these interior faces, and we will start extruding these outer edges out. So we'll extrude those out until we get something like that. And I'm just going to move those back a bit so they're roughly in line with the edges of our box. And now we have an interior for the back cover, the front cover, and the spine. We need to make sure that the spine interior is connected to the spine exterior. And we'll also just, because we're getting a bit of clipping here, we'll also just move it forward ever so slightly on the y-axis so that it's not intersecting with our spine object. Now we can select the spine interior and the spine exterior, Control P to parent the spine so that it moves along with the spine. And now our spine moves everything in our box. So that's the basics of the interior done. Let's start looking at the details of the interior. Namely, we need to create some hooks to hook our booklet into the box. So let's do that first. So let's select box front interior, go to edit mode by clicking tab. And we have our geometry here. Let's create some loop cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, say 5 of them on the top of our box. And the same down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like so. Right click to release. We're then going to loop cut vertically one more time, which allows us to grab the central face, or rather the third face up, and here the third face down from each of these box sections, and extrude them outwards with E to start creating these hooks that are going to hold our booklet in place. In fact, I don't like 5 loop cuts there. Let's do 4. 4 loop cuts allows us to create a perfectly central face to start our hooks from. So let's loop cut again twice in this interior section. Right click to release, and let's scale those down on the Y so that our hook's going to be a little bit thinner. Then with face selection, let's select this interior face here, this interior face here, and we'll just start extruding these out. So extrude, let's do 0.5 centimeters. And my hooks kind of bend inwards a little bit. Let's extrude out again just a little bit. We'll grab the interior edge here. Might be a bit hard to see, but you can grab this interior edge. And we'll grab this one too. Extrude those inwards with E. I think there. Let's do it again to create a corner for us. We'll grab these exterior edges, extrude them inwards again. So those hooks look pretty okay, but let's add some bends into them. To do that, let's scale this on the Z-axis to say 0.75. Do the same thing here, scale 0.75. Let's tab into object mode. That looks pretty okay to me, nice and simple. Let's not complicate things for us any further. So let's make the disc, and to make our lives easier, let's put it in the right position already, which is at the center of this interior section here. Let's select the outside of our box back here, tab into edit mode, and select just this outer face by going to face selection with 3 and selecting it. Then press Shift S and choose cursor to selected. That's going to pop our 3D cursor in the center of our box here. Let's tab back into object mode. Let's Shift a new mesh circle, and as you can see, it's going to be pretty large. We need to make this circle have a radius of 6 centimeters because game discs are 12 centimeters in diameter. That's going to reduce the game disc to the correct size, which you can see fits snugly inside the box. Vertices 32, I think, is totally fine. So let's rotate that along the x-axis 90 degrees. And we'll just bring it forward on the y-axis a little bit so we can see it inside of our box. Let's build it separate to our box, but we know that it's central. Let's tab into edit mode for that. Let's go to vertex selection. Press F to create a face for everything. So let's cut a hole in our disc. Let's create a face. Let's inset this face by pressing I and then do it 5.25 centimeters. That's going to create for us this central hole that we can then cut that out. So we'll go to face selection, cut out this central hole by selecting it, pressing X and then face. That's going to give us a hole in our disk. Now we can do some loop cuts. This loop cut here can be pretty rough. That's going to be the central clear section of the disk. This loop cut here, again, pretty rough. The outer section of the clear disk. Let's go tab into object mode and that'll do for our disk. Let's add a subdivision surface to make it a little bit smoother and rounder. And let's give it a solidify modifier as well, which will pop before the subdivision surface. And we'll give it a thickness of 0.02, just so that our disk isn't completely thin. Let's actually make that 0.04. That's looking quite good. Right click and shade auto smooth. While we're at it, let's do shade auto smooth for all of the interiors of our box as well. So box back interior, box front interior, spine interior, shade auto smooth. This box is looking, the CD is looking pretty good, but I think we need to crease these edges so that we get a better edge. So let's loop select the edge of our disk and press Shift A and then drag away from our disk edge here to create a nice hard edge on the edge of our CD. And let's do it for the inside too. Shift E to crease that. And we've now got a perfectly flat disc looking pretty nice. Now, here's a cool tip. I want to slap this onto the plastic. So I'm going to go up here and turn on snapping and then go down to face project, which is going to include the solidify thickness of our face interior. Now, when we move this on the Y axis by pressing G and then Y, as soon as we get somewhat close to the box, boop, it's going to slap onto that surface for us and we won't be able to move it off. You see it kind of plonks into position there. Bam, that's looking real nice. So that disc I now know is perfectly slapped onto our disc case interior. So let's create this sort of mechanism that keeps this disc in place. Let's Shift A new circle. Let's turn that down. Let's leave the vertices at 32, but let's decrease the radius to do 0.7 centimeters. That's going to create a circle that's roughly the size of the interior circle here, which we can then rotate on the x-axis 90 degrees, bring it forward a little bit so we can see what we're doing, and it's going to snap into position on that face because we still have snapping on. Let's now turn snapping off. Let's tab into edit mode, press 1 to go to vertex selection, and let's extrude these out on the y-axis just a little bit. Let's then do that again. Extrude y-axis again. Now we can move to edge select mode, and we're just going to edge select each of these loops. With those selected, we're going to split them by pressing V, and you'll see that kind of just turns all of the edges that were touching into their own edges. Let's right click those. Then we're going to select the front edges of this circle. Again, probably a shortcut for this, but whatever, it takes 10 seconds. Let's scale down the whole circle with S and then Alt S back up a bit and do that a few times. And that's going to basically separate out these little spikes for us. Then we can press G and Y to move them back, and it's going to create this kind of open spoked tooth thing. I don't really know what to call it. My disc also has an interior ring that is solid. So I'm going to edge select this circle, Shift D to duplicate it. This is still inside the same object. Let's scale that down. And then let's just simply extrude that out on the y-axis to be roughly the same depth. And voila, we've now got the interior of our disc holder. Right click, shade auto smooth. Let's give it a solidify modifier. Again, 0.04. That's looking pretty good. Let's create the exterior section that's going to hold this disc in place. Let's Shift A new circle. This time we want the radius to be 6.1. That's going to make it slightly larger than our disc. Rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees. Turn back on snapping, and let's just move it on the y-axis until it snaps into the interior of our box again. Turn off snapping. Tab into edit mode and go to point selection. Let's create a face with F. We're going to get some intersecting here, but don't worry, we'll fix that. Let's inset that face ever so slightly by pressing I. Then select our outer edge again and scale that up a touch. And we're just going to scale it up until the edges of these vertices here are slightly inside our hard edges of our box. Okay, let's grab everything there and let's move it forward on the y-axis just a touch to stop that intersecting. Tab back into edit mode, turn on X-ray if you'd like to see a bit clearer, and we're going to grab all these outside edges here, and we're going to press Scale X0, enter, and that's going to straighten up those edges for us. We then can press G and X to move them to be roughly on the inside of our box, and we'll do the same thing here. Let's grab all of these points, Scale X0, G and X, and move them like that. Let's turn off X-ray mode, tab into edit mode. Let's loop cut the interior of our ring and slide that pretty much all the way up close to that interior ring there, and press G and Y to extrude, or not extrude, to move in the y-axis our disc holder just a little bit. That's looking pretty good. Tab back into object mode, add another modifier. Let's add we don't need to add a solidify to this, we just need to add a bevel modifier. 0.04, 3 segments. Let's right click Shade Auto Smooth. And should we add a subdivision surface to it as well to make it more round? So let's create these grooves for the fingers around the edge. I'm going to isolate this in the view by pressing / on my numpad, but if you don't have that, you can just simply hide everything and then re-show your disk object here, essentially. So let's go tab into edit mode and let's select this interior face and delete it. So we're just left with this sort of ring object. And now let's grab some of these faces and we'll just delete them by pressing X and face. That allows us to go into vertex selection and press F on these edges here to create this nice smooth edge loop. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. So that'll be this face, delete both those faces, vertex selection mode, create a new face here. Tab back into object mode, / again to remove the isolation. And we now have our disc with our disc holder in the box. Looking pretty nice. The final thing we need to model is the booklet. And frankly, this one's probably the simplest of the lot. Let's Shift S our cursor back to the world origin and let's just add in a simple plane. We can scale this way down, rotate it on the X-axis 90 degrees. And again, let's turn on snapping to faces. And on the y-axis, we'll just make sure that that's snapped to the interior of our booklet. That's pretty cool. Okay, let's move this booklet into position behind these clips here. Tab into edit mode and just scale our book so that it fits roughly within our page selection. That looks a bit thick. I don't really like that. So let's do something like that. That looks more accurate to what you actually get. We're going to select all of our vertex points here. We're going to duplicate them and then right click and move them over on the y-axis. Then we're going to subdivide this front panel a whole bunch of times. Let's do let's do 30 times. Okay, great. Then let's select just this top corner point, press O to add proportional editing on. And then when we press G and Y here, we can scroll our mouse wheel to create this circle that kind of affects all of the points that we want to on our selection. And that allows us to just sort of pull with varying degrees of intensity our pages and points around a little bit to create this kind of lumpy, bumpy, slightly creased front cover to our book. Let's shade that auto smooth. See here we get these kind of nice creases. And then on this front page here, we're just going to triangulate these faces as well so that it's nice and smooth. That's looking pretty good. So let's take that back into position with G and Y, turn off proportional editing until we get something that's just behind the clasps of the book. Okay, cool. Tab into object mode and let's bring that book out so we can work on it a little bit easier. And I just want to go to face, point selection, select all these edge points here and press F to create a face between them. That's looking pretty good. Inside here, let's just select everything. Let's change the origin to the geometry here. and Shift S our cursor over to here. And let's just add in a new cube. Let's scale that cube down until it lives inside our booklet. And this can just serve as the interior of our book's pages. Let's select that point where it's intersecting. And with proportional editing on, let's just pull these back out. So that we don't get any unwanted intersection with those pages there. And on this face here, let's just pull that face outwards on X. Like so. And voila, we now have our booklet. Let's shimmy this guy and the pages back behind these clips. And let's tidy up our parenting. So we want these pages to be parented to our book exterior. And then we want the cover of the book to be parented to the box interior. We want the disc, this disc inner and this disc outer to be parented to this interior of the box as well. We want the interior of the box here to be parented to this. Control P, object, cube transform. The same for the interior of the box to the exterior of the box here, cube transform. And we're looking pretty good. So now you can see that we can pose our box however we like. We can start bringing this disc out so we can add some animations. We can start bringing these edges of the box in so we can pose it on any axes that we'd like. And that is the modeling of our disc box done. So the next thing to do is to texture this and to move on to sort of our UV unwrapping stage. Luckily, there's not much to do for that. We only actually need to UV unwrap, I think, 3 things. Okay, so let's take a look at UV editing this. I've gone through and done a little bit of changes. I've simplified the mesh for this book a little bit, changed these hooks a little bit, added a hook here. But other than that, this is the exact same file. Sorry for the changes. I lost everything. I had to start again. But apart from that, it's exactly the same. So let's look at unwrapping this box. There's only a few things we need to actually unwrap. The front and back covers, which are easy enough because there'll be images applied, the disc and the cover to our book. Everything else doesn't really need unwrapping because it's going to have just a single texture applied. So we can smart UV project those without any trouble. So let's look at the front of our box first of all. Let's select the exterior to the front of the box and go to UV editing. And let's select A to select everything. And we'll just isolate that by pressing / on the numpad. You see if we press A and then U and then unwrap, we get this kind of weird box here. The only thing you really need to do to unwrap this is quite simple, is to cut a few of these edges and add a few seams in. Essentially, a seam at either edge here. And you'll notice this is different on mine as well, but the UV editing process is the same. At the edge of every bevel, we just need to right click and mark as a seam. Let's do that on this corner too. This mesh is exactly the same. I just triangulated these faces as well. You can see here that you have this triangle section you'll have there. If you just select these faces and hit Control T, you'll have the exact same mesh as me. Apologies for that. Like I said, I lost everything. So we'll select this bottom edge and we'll select this edge here and we'll mark that as a seam. We'll do the same thing for these bottom edges. So here. And you can think of this process as we're just choosing points that we want to cut with scissors into our box so that we can get it to lay as flat as possible without deforming. Mark all those as seams. Now when we press A and then U to unwrap again, you'll start to see we get something a little bit more usable. These corners down here, not particularly an issue because they're not going to be very visible, but if you want to, you can try cutting into these seams as well. Mark seams, and you'll get a perfectly straight edge to your box. You'll get some overlapping when you do this though. That's the only concern. I'm going to leave those as uncut because on my design, it's just going to be blue. So it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to leave my UV unwrap to be like this. When we come to texture later on, this isn't actually going to be super useful because it's the wrong way around. So what we're going to do, as this is the front of our box, we're just going to select everything here, rotate that by -90 degrees. That's going to put the crease on the right-hand side. And I'm literally just going to move it with G to be on the top left of our edit of our UV unwrap. So let's select UV and export a UV layout. Let's make it 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels. And I'm going to stick that in a folder called Unwraps. So we'll make a new folder, call this Unwraps Tut. And in here, we're going to stick the box front.png unwrap. Now let's do the exact same thing to the back of the box. So we will isolate, tab into edit mode, unwrap it. Marcus Asim. Marcus Asim sounds like a man's name. Marcus Asim. You'll go insane marking Asim. Marcus Asim. Marcus Asim. Marcus Azim. My name is Marcus Azim. And we can unwrap that to this section. This is going to be the back of the box. So we'll select that, rotate Z, -90, putting the interior of the box over there. And this time we'll slap it up in the top right corner when we come to apply our textures later on. Bam, that's looking pretty good. The spine we'll need to unwrap as well. So let's grab our spine, tab, AU, unwrap. That one works as is out of the box, so that's not an issue. I will just go to the back of the box and export a UV layout as well. Box back. And we'll do the same thing for the spine. This is just a guide that we're going to take into Photoshop to create our textures, essentially. Spine, UV, unlock. Perfect. Let's do the disk. Grab the disk, UNU, unwrap. Perfect. UV, export UV layout. Disk, unwraps tut, save. And now let's unwrap the book. AU, unwrap. It's pretty good, to be fair. I don't care that the book is wonky sideways either. So let's keep that. UV, export UV layout, book outer, unwraps, tut. Great. So that's all the unwrapping we need to do. As you can see, really quite a simple thing. If you wanted to, you can go to the rest of your things here and do a smart UV project. But because this is all going to be clear plastic, this is only like good practice. You don't really need to unwrap these really, unless you're, good at Blender and you want to do that. Let's grab the front of the interior of the box. That one's done. Let's grab the spine interior of the box and smart UV project that. Awesome. So that's everything. That's all the smart UV projecting, all the UV unwrapping that we need to do. Our box is now ready to be textured. So let's save it. I'm going to add some basic textures onto this, and then we're going to add some proper textures onto the outside. So let's go to the shading view and let's look at our textures. First of all, we need to go to rendering, make sure we're in render engine cycles. I'm going to turn on GPU compute, but I'm going to turn my samples way down. Doesn't need to be particularly high fidelity. 512, I think, will be totally fine with some noise reduction. Let's select the outside of the box and create a new material, and we'll call this metal front. And this is going to be really simple. Okay, ready? We're going to add the base color to be ever so slightly blue, and we're going to crank a metallic all the way up to 1 metallic. Let's take the roughness all the way down to about 0.1. And for now, we'll call that good, because once we set up our scene, we'll start to see what it actually looks like. I'm going to add my image to this now. So I'm going to make sure that I have my Node Wrangler add-on turned on up here, which allows me to press Control-T to create an image texture that is mapped and has texture coordinates. And we're going to basically put a Photoshop file into this image texture. If you don't have Photoshop, you could obviously use whatever image editing software you'd like. So here we are in Photoshop. I'm just going to drag my box front PNG to create a new document like so. And you probably guessed what's going to happen here. For now, I'm just going to add a white rectangle behind my box front. And I'm just going to add in a bit of text to say front. Now let's save this box front PNG as a Photoshop file. We'll call it boxfront.psd. And I'm actually just going to turn off my guide layer so that we've got this option here for front. Back in Blender, let's open Unwraps Tut and choose box front.psd. And you can see that we now have our box aligned correctly with our texture overlaid on top. So let's do the same thing for the back. We'll select the back, we'll go to Metal Front, we'll duplicate that material, call it Metal Back, go into Photoshop, open up boxback.png. I'm just going to copy these two layers. Control-Shift-V to paste them in place. And just put the word back. 3 attempts to type the word back there. Fantastic. Save that as boxback.psd. In Blender, we'll change this image to be box back. And now we have the back and the front. Same thing for the spine. Duplicate the material, metal spine. In Photoshop, open the spine.png, paste those layers, change this to say spine, save that as spine.psd, and open spine.psd. So as you can see, there we've made a mistake. Our spine is the wrong way around. We could flip the artwork, but this is like the correct way that you would read it on the shelf. So instead, we're going to flip the UV unwrap. Let's go to UV editing. Let's select our spine, AU, to unwrap it, just to make sure that we're okay. And let's just rotate that 180 degrees. Now, if you check material preview, our spine is the correct way around. So we have the front, spine, and the back of our box. Okay, so let's create the material for our disc next. Let's select the disc, add new material, and call it disc. Same thing, Control T. In Photoshop, let's open up our disc. Change the text to say disc. We'll deal with the transparency issues of our disc later. For now, let's just get all of the materials in there. Let's open up disc.psd. You can see here, for example, our disc is slightly wonky. So luckily we can just rotate it on its local or global y-axis to put the disc the right way up. And we'll deal with the transparencies of this disc momentarily. For the box inners, we select that, new material, box inner. This one's really easy. We just turn the transmission all the way up and add a bit of roughness, maybe like 0.2 roughness. That's essentially going to make our disc interior plastic see-through. Let's apply the same material to these other two box sections. For the book, new material, book, and new material, book inner. Those can just be quite simple for now. For the book exterior, we're going to just increase the roughness so it's not quite so shiny. Control T, go to Photoshop, take book outer here, give ourselves some files to work with. And just call this book. Let's save that as book outer and load it in. Cool, that's looking pretty nice. So let's take a little look at setting our scene before we go too much further so we can see how we're looking in an actual environment. I'm going to load some studio lighting as a HDR into our environment here. So I'm going to go to my shading window and I'm going to switch from object to world. And I'm going to give myself a background image and I'm going to open up this download that I got from the internet, studiosmall.exr. Let's just open that image. Now, when we go to rendered view mode, you'll see that we're inside this studio, which gives us some nice shiny lighting on our metal box. And we're going to use this to set our scene a little bit. So let's go back into layout view for now. And let's close up our box. Let's do RZ90. And let's do that here too, RZ90. And grabbing our spine, we want to make sure we're in front of the graphic. And place our box basically in the center of our scene. All of our box needs to be controlled by the spine, but it would be helpful to have like a centrally aligned control node for the box itself. So I'm going to go to Shift-A, Empty, New Plane Axes. Let's scale that down a little and then apply the scale. And I'm going to select my spine, select my plane axes with Shift, and then parent that to this object. This just allows me to take this object as the empty and control the rotation and position of my box, while still allowing me to individually open, close, etc. all of my box elements. Let's add in a camera. Let's enter the camera with 0 and press N to bring up the item view. Let's go to View and choose Lock to Camera View, which means we can now scroll with the mouse to move our camera around. I'm going to go to Item, and I'm going to zero out all these values and then put the X value at 90, which gives me basically a perfectly strong front-on view of my game box. And let's change the resolution of this to 1080 by 1080. You can see here now that it's kind of like filled my screen. So if I go back to my view and uncheck that and then scroll, I can rescale that with that positioning my box a bit nicer. I don't like how little of the spine we can see. So on my camera, I'm going to push my focal length way up. And as you can see, the more I push this length up, the more of the spine we see, the more it flattens out the image. This looks weird in isolation, but on all the box mockups I've ever done, this is the way that they actually prefer it to be for like the video game industry and stuff, so that you can see more of the spine as well as the front of the box. Of course, now when we rotate, we get less distortion on our box because our lens is so far zoomed in. Let's go to the camera. Let's do focal length 900. I think something like that for now. Obviously, we can only see the exterior of the box here. I can do some different shots, but for the basic shot, let's get this lined up. I'm going to go to the top right of my window and click and drag so that I can bring out a rendered view here. And I'll switch to rendered view in this window, and I'll pop out of my camera in this window here, so I can start working on my lighting for the scene. This camera is very distracting. I'm just going to scale it down. It doesn't actually affect anything. So as you can see, the studio lighting in here is fairly nice as it is. So that's one way to light your scene, with a world reflection map, which gets the most out of these metallic kind of properties that we've applied to our textures. Another way to light your scene is to do it manually with lights in Blender. So we're going to try and do that. We'll see if this video lags out like mad. Let's add in a few lights. Let's add an area light, scale it down. I'm going to rotate it along the x-axis, -90 degrees. And I'm going to pop it behind my box to give me just a little bit of a rim light. Let's do something like that. Let's do another light, area light, scale it down. Let's rotate that on the y-axis, -90 degrees, and move it over to the left so that we start to get a reflection on the side of my spine of my box. Again, let's reduce the power of that to about 5 instead. That looks pretty good. Let's add in another area light. Rotate that on the y-axis, scale it down, bring it over to this front side of our box. And let's just get a little bit of bloom so that the front side of our box is lit like that. Let's add a point light, move it directly above our box, slightly in front of it. Let's increase the radius a whole bunch so it really softens it out. And we can use that for this kind of swooping light across the front of the box. So that's looking pretty nice. What I'm going to do now is a quick texture in Photoshop. Let's go back to Material Preview. Let's do a quick texture in Photoshop for the front and sides of our box. I'm literally just going to grab some of my Blender box supplies and stick them on my box here. So now we have our spine, back of our box and the front of our box for a very quick and dirty 3D render. Bam, you can see that's updated now. So back in layout view, Let's go to rendered view here. And we can see the shine on our box. So now that we've got the textures in, we can start to work on this a little bit better. Let's go to the shading view. I think I'm going to take the reflectiveness down of my metal a little bit. Something like that. Let's turn up the roughness a little. Like so. Obviously, that's only going to affect the front of my box. We need to do the same thing to the others as well. So metallic is 0.6 and the roughness is now 0.18. And we'll do that for the back of the box too. You could link these up and everything, you know, if you wanted to. And then it's just a case of playing with your lights until you get a render that you're happy with. I quite like this kind of shine here on the edge of my box, like so. Again, alternatively, you could use your render maps and everything, your HDR maps. And there you have it. You have your mock-up finished and ready. Of course, you can finish your texturing, do the discs and things like that. So the final thing that we need to look at is the transparency on the disk. So let's isolate this disk and go to rendered view mode. Essentially, we're going to tab into edit mode here, and we're going to select all these faces. And we're going to apply a second material to this disk. So under the disk material, we'll add a new material. And in this material slot here, we're going to add the box inner material. So we have the disk material as slot 1, box inner as slot 2. With this section of the mesh selected, assign box inner to that section. If you get this kind of effect, that's due to the subdivision surface. So you'll just need to loop select this outer ring and then crease with Shift E to fix that. And you'll see now we have this transparent material applied to the inner edge of the ring with the artwork applied to the outer edge. So you just need to do the same thing on these outer sections here too. They already have the crease. You just need to grab each section, assign that second material to it. And again, here, we just need to crease these edges to solve this subdivision surface issue. Crease to resolve. Crease to resolve. And we now have transparency on the outer edges of the disk with artwork on the interior. Obviously, in my current layout, you can't even see the disk, but you will do so in the final render. So the final thing to be aware of is just a few render settings. If we go down to our render settings panel here, make sure again that we're in cycles and that GPU compute is on if you've got that supported. I think max samples of 1024 for any first starting renders and denoise being turned on is probably a good place to start. If you want to have your transparent background, you just go under to film and turn on transparent. And what that does is anything that doesn't have an object in the scene will be rendered as transparent as represented by this kind of dotted hex grid here. When you're ready to render and you're happy with what you've made, you can just hit F12 and it will start rendering your image for you. Once that's finished rendering, you can just click Image, Save As, and you can save your finished render file. And that's it. And there you have it, just a few examples of the renders that I chose in the end. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and found it useful. I do appreciate this was a bit more involved and I didn't cover the entire process, but this video is already nearing, the hour mark, so it needs to be done. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next time on TipTut. Absolutely massive thanks to my level 2 and above members who are, frankly, very lovely. Very, very lovely people. If you'd like to join the channel to support me, you can click the join button below for exclusive perks and benefits. Thank you very much.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.